When those three guys are rolling, the shot making from all three, it's actually horrifying.
But really quick, before I begin, smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm. It seriously makes a huge difference in my videos. That way, YouTube knows to recommend this video to a brand new audience who can also smash the like button. So thank you so much for doing that, and let's begin.
You were on the call last night.
Yeah.
Detroit had 38 in the first quarter. And then I thought it was going to be kind of a classic Nets, like, hey, we're back in this. Durant was out. But then it didn't really work out that way. It didn't come back in. We know the offensive numbers. Like, I keep looking at that fourth quarter stuff. It's incredible. When those three guys are rolling, the Clippers game in particular, the shot making from all three, it's actually horrifying. Because I would say, like, as much as I love that Golden State group, that's a group that I would put that five, maybe the most talented five we've ever seen in the history of the game. But then it's like, wait, look at these three guys. And Kyrie's off the dribble stuff. Harden isn't a spot up guy by any means. So we've seen them all together. Look, you've had it for a couple of weeks. Give me your first impressions, the general stuff. You don't win the game last night, but just kind of where you're at now with the team.
Yeah, like I think that in general, that the prospects of where they want to be are on the table, right? Like I think seeing them at their best, watching them against good teams, late game situations, you're like, oh yeah, like this team could win a finals this year. That's how I feel. That's how I felt watching the Clippers game. That's how I felt watching them against Milwaukee. That's how I felt watching them against basically, every plus 500 team that they've played thus far this season. And so I feel like their defense in those games is good enough. It's not great. It's not fantastic, but it's good enough. It's not like noticeably horrible. It's good enough. And the offense is unbelievable. And what's impressed me, Rye, is that they actually, I think they really quickly figured out how to access each other's strengths. Like maybe there's little tweaks, like at times Harden could still be more aggressive. At times you'd like, Durant to get more shots. But for the most part, I do think that in this recent run before the Durant weird protocol thing happened, like you saw all of them at their best together on the floor and really finding ways to accentuate each other's strengths and playing unselfishly. And so that really encourages me. And that's why, like, long term, and you put them with Joe Harris and Jeff Green as the small ball five. And that five, I think, could be a closing five of a title team. I think that five is good enough. What has been concerning, though, dude, is that, like, they just do not bring it every night, and when they play lesser opponents, and granted, last night against Detroit, you didn't have your best player in Durant, but, watching the defense at the start of that game, there's just, we're talking about guys not jumping, like, guys just, letting them waltz into the paint, and there's been a lack of urgency on a night in, night out basis. They don't have a defensive, laden roster when it comes to personnel. In order for them to be adequate defensively, they need to bring it each night. And they've only really brought it when they play, top competition. And then I think they play decent enough defense to get by. But in those other games, it's like they find themselves in a 20-point hole like this. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, can their offensive talent get them out of it now that they realize, oh, we have to play?
Yeah, because the Clippers defense was incredible. I thought, the Clippers are going to get whatever they want. I mean, the Detroit game, the beginning of that one last night, you could see Pistons players on offense drive and be surprised, like, wait, I'm this open? They'd almost stop expecting a normal defensive resistance. And then it's like, wait, I can actually take just another step because no one cares or no one's rotated, or it's Jeff Green who's got stretched further away. And what I don't like, and I've seen this from more teams recently, is these teams that are put together and they already buy into themselves. And it's great to be confident, but when you've never done it as a group, why do you carry yourself as a group that's done it a few times? If the Lakers want to coast for a bit, and the scary thing is they're 19-6 and they're tweaking and experimenting, and guys have missed some games and they're still 19-6 and they're off a title. It's okay. The Clippers shouldn't be able to do that. Boston a couple years ago, that joke of a team that was talking about how no one can beat them in 7 and these hype videos, and then they get smashed by the Bucks in 5 games. But they were so full of themselves, going like, look at us, look at us. And now it's a collection of players like Durant has done it, Harden hasn't, Kyrie has. We'll get into the Kyrie stuff here a little bit. So if at the end of this we're going, whatever, we should have never doubted him, I don't know why they would just assume that they're amazing. And I'm with you, like versions of them are really good, but I feel like matchup-wise, they're not beating the Lakers, even if they've locked down defensively to whatever their standard is to get out of the East. I can't imagine them dealing with that front line of the Lakers.
It's interesting because I was thinking about this last night, and, when you first get the asset in Harden, right, now you're going to have, you should have anyway, the most stripped down version of your roster you're ever going to have with these 3 guys, right?
Yeah.
Like even if you think of the way the Miami team evolved, from year 1 with Bosh, James, and Wade versus the kind of depth that they ended up having. They were never incredibly deep, but all of a sudden you had like 7, 8 guys you felt good about, right? By the end of that title run. Whereas in year 1, you had like 4. And I think that's what the Nets are going to be fighting a little bit is, can they, through the buyout market, which has become a very legitimate vessel to, championship sort of augmenting assets, can you get to that place you need to be this year to have the front court to be able to play with the Lakers? Or is it going to be the kind of thing where you are able to still get out of the East because you're talented enough for that, but you're not complete until an off season and being able to supplement what you have here. And that remains to be seen. I mean, if you put a Drummond on this team or a Horford or a McGee, do you think that then they would be good enough to take down a Laker team?
No, I don't. Because Drummond, I mean, the weird thing is the Lakers can be huge now. So some guys like Drummond, I worry about in closing moments of playoff games because it's like, actually, do we want to take him off the floor? And I think the scary thing about the Lakers is they can go small, and small for them is Davis at the 5 that he doesn't want to do, but they did it when they needed to last year in the playoffs. And then they've had times where they've had Montrez, AD, and LeBron out there all at the same time. Mm-hmm. I think Drummond is, I know his numbers. I know what he is. He doesn't get me all that excited. JaVale doesn't get me real excited. Horford's put up some nice little stretches here where he's more productive offensively because he's just away from Embiid and those guys getting in each other's way. But I don't like the way Horford moves as much now. So you're right. You're right to bring up all those things. And it's a great point because basically when you max out your team in that first transaction, you're the most stripped down version of yourselves. We're like, right. Look at the Lakers. I like them better now than I did last year. Right. I remember when Boston had that group in 2007, 2008, I was like, man, they're going to be better next year. And arguably, look, Tibbs always tells me the 09 team was better than the 08 team, but the 08 team was new and they were healthy and everybody was fresh and they rolled through the whole thing with some bumps in the road. But yeah, maybe I'm not trying to sound negative on it. I guess maybe it's more of a respect for the Lakers and hell, even Utah, I think at this point is somebody we have to start thinking about. Yeah,
I think that's totally reasonable, Rye. And I also think that, and I also do think even when I think about like, well, if this is the worst version of themselves, then next year they could be the favorites. It's like, well, it's still one of your shots, right? Like in all, you still don't want to punt on one of your shots. When you're like good enough to potentially get there, you want to be good enough to win it too. You can't just say, oh, next year. So I do think that they have that in mind, and I am curious how they supplement it. I think a title is on the table for them this year, but to the point you were just talking about the Lakers being 19-6 despite tweaking, I do think that, after these games, I think Durant, Harden, Kyrie, I think they've all been really honest in assessing like how unacceptable the effort is in these games and how they need to bring it on a consistent basis. But the thing that alarms me is it hasn't changed. Right. Like,
look,
it has.
If I had $1 for every time Kyrie, like after something didn't work out, would say, "Hey, man, we just got to do this," and you're like, "Okay," or Harden knows what to say. I mean, Harden actually convinced himself that he did Houston a favor when he left. So these guys have been around long enough. They know.
And they're smart. They're all smart. They're all super smart. Yeah. I think that the other thing is, right, like it's also like habits, right? You don't want to get into habits where you just think, oh, we could turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off. First of all, you're going to lose enough games that it affects your seeding, and it affects like what kind of matchups you have in the playoffs. Secondly, at some point, then it becomes part of your DNA, and that's not championship DNA. So it's still early enough where I don't think you're there. And I do think the Nets were thrown a little bit of a wrench. This is going to sound like an excuse, but I think it's somewhat legitimate. Like, I felt like they were about to go on a nice run, and then they had won, like, I think it was 5 of 6, to just be in the Clippers, and then the Durant thing happened. And I think they kind of like fell into their old ways here these last 3 games. And I am curious what it would have been like if that didn't happen. But regardless, when he gets back, like, they need to build some kind of consistency here so that this doesn't become even more of a trend and become one of those, sort of self-fulfilling prophecies that becomes part of their DNA for the whole season.
Yeah, because I'm trying to be fair. Look, if the Nets come out of the East, I'm not going to sit here and be like, wow, I didn't see that coming. Because, I mean, right. Kyrie alone, who I've seen the good and I've seen the bad, when his shot making, when he decides, like, okay, I really like want to show off here a little bit in a good way, it's filthy. It's filthy what he can do. Yeah, it's amazing. And when those 3 guys are together, it's, good luck when it's rolling. But, we haven't even brought up Philadelphia because, like, what the hell would Embiid do against this version of it right now? Even, again, you're right. There's probably another big coming. We don't know when. They have to be looking at some of the tax stuff that they're dealing with now. They're probably going to be a little creative about maybe delaying it longer than they'll need to, but it depends on the competition in the market. But, we shouldn't even, like, everybody's off in Milwaukee because nobody cares anymore, which isn't fair. And Philly, despite an easier schedule and some of the things that I think are still worth questioning with them, Embiid against this group right now in a 7-game series is going to get 40 a game.
Yeah, he is. It's true. I don't dismiss Milwaukee either. I really don't. I think that, the Nets, look, we know it's hard to beat a team in a close game when the other team has 3 of the 4 best players on the floor. I mean, right. That team usually wins those games. We know that in basketball. But are the deficiencies in, the areas where the Nets are thin, are they big enough, and are the gaps wide enough that those other teams can take advantage, with the physicality, with the second chances? I mean, even, Rye, the turnovers too, and that is actually a little bit of a concern for me too. And that was in Golden State's DNA a little bit too, during their title runs. Like, we're so talented offensively, we can be a little more careless with the basketball. But, like, the difference was those Warriors teams were so good defensively that they actually did have a little bit more of a margin for error, right? This Nets team, if you look at, like, their defensive field goal percentage, their numbers on that are actually okay. They've been right around 12th to 15th in that category. I think they're like, 9th in defensive 3-point percentage, but they give up like 20 more field goal attempts a game. And it's, the result of not being able to secure the defensive glass, and then also really being careless on the offensive end. The other day, they gave up 17 fast break points in the first quarter to Toronto. The league leaders averaged 17 for a game. And I think that, like, that part of it, we talk about the defense, but I think, like, it's also the focus on the offensive end with not being careless with these possessions. And again, it's early enough that none of this has me to the point where I'm like, these are fatal flaws. No, I'm not at that point. But it is something that I think, like, there needs to be more of a focus and an attention to detail that, like, locks in at some point soon, because you're going on for a while now making the same exact mistakes over and over again.